This episode is made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.
For me, my ADHD and my hyperfocus has really been something I've certainly challenged, or it's been a challenge over the years, but it's something that I've been able to really utilize as a strength in a way that it's helped me to overcome challenges that I certainly never thought were possible early on.
Hello, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell, and welcome to Distraction. Today we have a truly fascinating guest, and I know I say that about all my guests, but this guy even surpasses truly fascinating. So I don't know what the ultimate of truly fascinating is, but he's an amazing man. I'm going to let him tell you his story, but he really is an amazing man. He is the author of a book called Chasing My Cure, A Doctor's Race to Turn Hope into Action, a memoir. And it's an absolutely fascinating story. I don't want to jump the lead, and I want him to tell you about it. His name is David Fajgenbaum, and I'll just spell that in case you want to go to Amazon. It's Fajgenbaum, Fajgenbaum. He's brilliant, also a world-class athlete, played quarterback at Georgetown, was called The Beast, and has gone on to do truly pioneering work. And I can't underline that enough. He's only like 20 years old. I can't believe how young he is, but he's older than that. But I'll let him tell you exactly how old he is. And before I broadcast any more misinformation, let me just welcome Dr. David Fajgenbaum to this podcast.
Ned, thank you so much for having me on today. What an introduction. I feel like I need to bring you around to more things. This is probably the best introduction I've ever received.
Well, you're an amazing man. It's not hard to introduce you. So why don't we just get right to it? You're on the faculty at Penn Medical School, and one of the great medical schools in the world, and you're the co-founder and executive director of the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network. And you're an NIH-funded physician scientist. You're pretty much amazing. But can you tell us the story of Castleman disease, and how did you happen to get involved with that?
Sure. I went to Penn for medical school, and I was determined to become a physician because I lost my mom to cancer while I was in college. And watching her battle with cancer and watching the amazing way that her physicians took care of her and her resilience really inspired me to say that I want to dedicate my life to taking care of patients like my mom. She passed away in my sophomore year, and that really lit a fire within me that I wanted to exact revenge on cancer. And
what kind of cancer was it?
It was brain cancer, a glioblastoma.
Oh boy! And
it was just absolutely devastating for me as a college student. To go through her diagnosis and then her battle and passing, it just was so difficult. But watching her really inspired me, and watching the way that she fought would actually serve as a blueprint for how I would then go on to fight my own personal illness. And so I went to Penn for medical school, and in my third year of medical school, I was on rotations. And in the midst of taking care of patients, I started noticing I was more tired than usual. I noticed that I had some lumps in my neck. I didn't really know what they were. I saw fluid appearing around my legs and my ankles. I didn't know what that was. I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know what. I eventually, I wanted to make it to one of my medical school exams, so I studied for this exam. I took it, and then I went straight for my exam down the hall to the emergency department, and they ran blood work. And the doctor came in and said, David, your liver, your kidneys, and your bone marrow are shutting down. We have to hospitalize you right away. And that would create or that would initiate the start of what would be about a 6-month ordeal where I was in and out of the ICU. I was first admitted to the hospital and then to the ICU where I had a retinal hemorrhage. I went blind in my left eye. I gained 70 pounds of fluid, really drifting in and out of consciousness on a feeding tube, getting transfusions daily. Really, if you can remember, the sickest of the sick patients that you've treated in your career, this is where I was. And unfortunately, all with no diagnosis. And so I was really teetering on the brink of death with multi-organ failure, but we didn't know what it was.
And you were given last rites, correct?
That's right. At 11 weeks, the doctors said, we don't have a diagnosis, and he's dying. He may not make it more than a couple more days, and told my family to come in and say their goodbyes. So a priest came in, read my last rites to me.
So you're Catholic?
I am Catholic, that's right. I was so sick that I don't really remember the experience of having my last rites read to me. But I think I have a vague memory of seeing the priest and kind of knowing what that meant. But fortunately, right around the time that my family said goodbye and we prepared for me to no longer be here was when the diagnosis was finally made of idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease, which is this rare immune system disorder where the immune system becomes hyperactivated and just starts to attack all of your vital organs like your heart, your lungs, your kidneys, and your bone marrow, and all for an unknown cause. And so the way that you treat that, because we don't know exactly what's wrong, is just to use chemotherapy. And so we don't know exactly what to target, but we're just going to give you toxic chemotherapy and hope that it kills whatever's the problem.
Why not steroids?
You get steroids as well, but unfortunately, steroids rarely work. And so I did receive a lot of steroids in those early days, but unfortunately, the immune hyperactivation is just too intense. So, like, even getting 1,000 milligrams prednisolone, wouldn't do anything.
Wow.
And so
and blanket chemotherapy? I mean, they don't know what they're poisoning.
So, yes, it's a combination called VDT-ACE, which is a combination of 7 different chemotherapies. It's a multiple myeloma regimen, but it basically is just completely ablative of everything. And so I got this combination of 7 different chemotherapies, and it saved my life. Unfortunately, I would go on to have relapse after relapse after relapse. The chemotherapy could save my life, but it just kept coming back and coming back. And, with each of these relapses where I nearly died, I really learned a lot about life and a lot about living from, these sort of near-death experiences, which is why, I know you mentioned this earlier, why I ended up going on to write this book, Chasing My Cure, because with each of those experiences, there was some really important lesson. And, I'll just share a couple right now. I talked earlier about how my mom and her battle really served as this blueprint, or at least guide for me as I struggled with my own personal challenges. But I remembered as I laid in my hospital bed, not thinking that I would survive, I remembered a couple instances of my mom in particular that really helped me quite a bit. And the first was from when she first had surgery to remove the brain tumor. And I remember we were so worried, would she survive surgery? They were going to cut out a large portion of her brain for the tumor. And, would she be the same person coming out? I remember being so scared and going to the room with my dad and my sisters to see her. They pulled back the curtains, and my mom was there looking at us, and she pointed up to her head. And on her head, she had bandages, and she had this bulb kind of protruding out that was sucking the fluid out. And she pointed to her head, and she said, "Chiquita Banana Lady." And we just burst into laughter. In the midst of this really, really tough experience, to be able to make a joke, to be able to make light, that she looked like the Chiquita Banana Lady. That was one of many pearls that I learned from my mom about dealing with adversity. And so that one in particular is finding humor and positivity in the midst of really tough times. And so during my battle, I found times like that. There was actually a time where on New Year's Eve, I was so sick and I had gained so much fluid all over my body. I had a giant belly from all the fluid from my liver and kidney failure. I could barely walk, but I was finally improving with chemotherapy. And on New Year's Eve, we passed the family waiting area. My dad and I were taking a walk, and there was a guy who looked like he'd been drinking too much alcohol on New Year's Eve. He was kind of like swaying in his chair. And then on a second trip around the floor, this gentleman had fallen onto the ground. And so my dad ran over to him and helped him back into his chair. And he looked at my dad and I and he said, "Thanks so much. Good luck to you and your wife." We're like, "Wife? What is he talking about?" And then I looked at my belly and I realized he thought I was my dad's pregnant wife. which was a low point emotionally for both of us. But we laughed really hard, and you would think, if you're getting confused as a pregnant woman and you're in the midst of getting chemotherapy, that would be, so challenging. And I'm not going to lie, it was not easy to hear, but watching the way my mom found humor in the midst of really tough times taught me that, sometimes just laughing and finding humor can be really powerful. And so lessons like that, pearls really about life. And this isn't just about how you die, but it's really about how you live. And so in the midst of this battle and back and forth, in and out of the hospital, the fourth relapse I had was on an experimental drug. It's the first drug to ever undergo a randomized controlled trial for my disease. It was kind of the drug that we all were hoping for. It finally was undergoing trials, and I was on it. And we just hoped and we prayed that this drug would keep me in remission. And then I relapsed on it. So I relapsed on the only drug in development. And I remember having a conversation with my doctor while I was in the midst of getting my chemotherapy because I needed those 7 drugs to try to save my life. And I said to him, okay, well, this experimental drug didn't work. What other drugs are there in development? And he said, there are none. I said, well, what other leads are there? There must be something out there. And he said, no, that there are none. I said, well, what about researchers? Are there people out there that are going to find a solution? And he said, it's unlikely in time to save you. And so when my doctor left my room, I turned to my dad and my sisters and my girlfriend, Caitlin, and I told them, I said, I'm going to dedicate the rest of my life, however long that may be, to trying to identify a treatment and maybe even a cure for this disease. And I certainly didn't think that I would actually be able to make progress against this disease, but I knew that if I didn't do it, no one else would. And I knew that if I was going to hope for a cure, if I was going to hope for a future, maybe even get married to Caitlin one day, maybe have a family, that I would need to turn my hope into action. I would need to start doing and taking action to get closer to the reality that I was hoping for. And as I've shared with you when we chatted in the past, I tend to get very, very, very focused on certain things. And if I make a commitment that I'm going to chase after a cure, that is all that I do. And actually, I was diagnosed when I was in high school with ADHD, and in particular, this really strong hyperfocus. And so throughout my life, I've had a different passion that I've chased. And so when I was growing up, I wanted to play college football. And so all I did was train all day, every day. I had poster boards all over my wall with my running times and my throwing distance, my accuracy. I was just constantly focused on how can I get better and faster and stronger so I can achieve my dream. I got to college, and with my mom's passing, I decided I want to go to medical school and focus on medical school. I started a foundation for grieving college students, again, just so focused on these few things. But then when it was clear that I would not survive and I wouldn't be able to achieve any of the things that I wanted to, like treating cancer patients in memory of my mom, that I knew that I would need to focus all of my attention on Castleman disease. And so for me, my ADHD and my hyperfocus has really been something I've certainly challenged, or it's been a challenge over the years, but it's something that I've been able to really utilize as a strength in a way that it's helped me to overcome challenges that I certainly never thought were possible early on.
And turn it into an asset. But you were well enough in between relapses to start researching this terrible disease.
That's right, and not for long. I didn't have long periods of wellness, but the disease is very episodic. So basically, when it's on and when I'm relapsing, I'm in the ICU on life support, and I'm needing transfusions to keep me alive and dialysis because my kidneys stop working. But as soon as we get the disease into remission, I start to improve, and then in these cases, I would have windows of time, months at a time, where I was healthy and I was back in medical school. And so I was able to focus my time back in medical school on doing Castleman disease research. Obviously, I had to do a number of medical school rotations, but any time I could get an opportunity to do Castleman's research, I started conducting experiments on my own samples, on my blood, my lymph node tissue. I also started a foundation called the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network because I knew that no matter how hard I tried, no matter how hard I focused on Castleman, that we really wouldn't make enough progress unless we got together a global community to work together. And so the CDCN I built that in order to try to drive forward the science on an international scale. And in the midst of this kind of the early progress, running some experiments, building this network, I had my fifth deadly recurrence of this disease. And this time I was engaged to Caitlin, and I'd hoped that maybe I could make it to our wedding day. But again, it came back, and it was brutal the fifth time. I spent a month hospitalized, nearly died again.
You're in the ICU again. You're multi-system failure. You're barely alive.
That's exactly right. Literally, medical technology keeping me alive, just kind of by a thread. And this is the fifth time. And so by the fifth time, with each of them, I didn't think I would survive. But by the fifth time, it was just hard to imagine that I could make it through that. And somehow, some way I did. But when I got out of the hospital, I had May 24th, 2014. That was my wife and I's wedding date. And I had that date. I had to do anything I could to make it to that date. I didn't know how long I could live, but if I could make it to that date. And so I started running additional experiments and going through the data. And I eventually found a signal in the data that suggested that maybe this one communication line in the immune system called the mTOR pathway, that pathway, that communication line, seemed to be turned on in my samples compared to other individuals.
Wow. So you're in between moments of dying. You're doing these cutting-edge, incredibly advanced, groundbreaking experiments using your own tissue as the sample.
That's exactly right. And, we talked about earlier the gift that, ADHD can be to just focus on one thing only. I mean, literally nothing else.
And to innovate. I mean, you weren't following a cookbook. You were totally innovating.
That's right. And really, this is also an example of, when the stakes are this high. I mean, there was no time for mistakes, and there was a clear timeline here. I needed to find something so I could make it to our wedding date. And based on those experiments and based on that finding, as you know, there's a drug that targets this communication line, sirolimus. It was developed 30 years ago for kidney transplantation. It had never been used before for Castleman disease, but I knew that it could turn off the communication line that I found was turned on in my samples. And so I started taking it as the first Castleman's patient ever on it.
How did you get that? Just called up the transplant people? Or
So actually, my oncologists were able to prescribe it. It's so much cheaper than all of the chemotherapy drugs that I had gotten that my insurance company didn't give us any pushback once the prescription was written, even though it had never been used before for this use. And so I started it, and actually it was 6 years ago yesterday that I started on this drug. And with my wife, Caitlin, and I, we made it to our wedding date. We got married on May 24th, and we celebrated with our daughter, Amelia, who's 16 months old. And so she was part of the celebration yesterday as well. And just actually, it certainly makes me emotional just thinking about, if this drug had not helped me, I wouldn't, certainly wouldn't be here to be with my daughter Amelia, and she wouldn't be here. And so it's amazing how.
So that drug, you continue to take that drug?
I continue to take that drug, sirolimus. I take it every day. I also get an infusion every month of another drug that we think helps to potentiate and support the way that sirolimus works. And I'm now 6 years with no relapses.
How common is Castleman disease?
It's rare. Only about 5,000 patients are diagnosed each year in the U.S., but it's not ultra rare. That's about as common as ALS. And, of course, ALS has much, much more awareness for it, and it needs a lot of awareness because ALS is such an awful disease. But there are many rare diseases like Castleman. There are actually 7,000 rare diseases that account for about 30 million Americans, most of which have very little attention and very little awareness from the public. And so we're working really hard. And another reason why I wrote this book is to try to spread the word about Castleman disease. Castleman is one of many rare diseases, and it's a particularly bad disease. A third of us with my subtype of Castleman's will die within 5 years of diagnosis, and another third will die within 10 years of diagnosis. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
And it's as common as ALS?
As common as ALS.
Yeah, my nephew, who was an orthopedic surgeon, died of ALS after
I'm so
getting married and having a baby, and he was in his prime. He was 36. fix.
Oh, goodness. I'm so sorry to hear that. ALS is such an awful disease.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
I mean, do you think there's something in the pipeline for ALS? I mean, nobody knows what causes it.
That's exactly right. I think that there's reason to be hopeful in ALS because, as you know, there's been a massive infusion of funding into ALS research. Right. And more recently, there's been some really promising data with this. It's basically a stem cell infusion where they're actually able to show in a few humans, and actual patients, some improvement in ALS, which really has never been shown before. And then there's another therapy, another cellular therapy with T regulatory cells that can show that you can slow the progression of ALS. And so the cure is not there yet, but I think that each of these pieces are coming together that makes me optimistic about the future for ALS.
Do we know the cause of Castleman?
We don't. So my subtype of Castleman is called idiopathic multicentric Castleman disease. Idiopathic meaning we don't know the etiology.
You know what my old medical school professor said? Idiopathic means the doctor is an idiot and the patient is pathetic.
Oh, geez. Well, I can't say that that's too far off from where we were. We've made some progress. Us physicians are not quite as much idiots, and us patients are in better position than we were when we got started in 2012. But yeah, it's one of these diseases where it's very poorly understood. It's
just the most amazing story. I just to be told you're going to die, and then to say, well, we'll see about that. Experimental animal. I mean, it's just, if it weren't true, it would be hard to believe. I mean, it's just remarkable. How old are you actually now, David?
I'm 34. I'll be 35 in March.
Wow. My goodness. And you've nearly died 5 times.
5 times. That's right.
And been read the last rites. That's just.
Yeah. I feel much, much older than my age in the sense that a lot's happened, especially in the last decade. I was totally healthy, 25 years old in 2010, and here we are in 2020, and a lot's happened in the last 10 years.
To put it mildly, I mean, you're truly, truly inspirational. I mean, your absolute dogged determination to hold on to life and to the point of finding the cure for your own disease. It's really remarkable. Now, if somebody wants to get in touch, like support the Castleman Disease Collaborative Network, how would they do that? Oh,
we'd be so thrilled. There's so much work that still needs to be done. So our website is cdcn.org, Castleman Disease Collaborative Network is cdcn.org. And to learn more about this journey and this effort, I said earlier, chasing my cure. We still haven't found the cure. This drug has kept me in a long remission. It's been 6 years, but we know from other patients that it isn't. We certainly can't expect that it will work forever. And so we're still chasing my cure and chasing our cures. But I'm so thankful that this drug has worked for as long as it has. And so for more information about the journey and also about my book, Chasing My Cure, you can go to chasingmycure.com. And one thing that you and I talked about earlier that I'd love to just talk about a little bit more is around how, this has been a turn of events and kind of progress that I don't think I ever dreamed possible. But I really don't think that the progress we made would have been possible if not for the focus and the hyperfocus that I have from my ADHD, that this, my ability to just only hone in on, one thing for hours and hours and hours and set boundaries with myself and use calendars and alerts and alarms on my phone to help me to create boundaries so that I can also be a good spouse and a good father. But these sort of things and my focus, which certainly I would have been told a number of times as a child that I had, this disability, but really I think that it's helped me to even be on the phone with you right now alive, thanks to this gift in a way that I have.
Well, you're absolutely living proof of what I've been saying for decades, that if you manage this condition properly, it becomes a tremendous asset, and God knows you've managed it properly. The notion of attention deficit, it's absurd. It's not a deficit at all. It's an abundance of attention. The challenge is to control it, and you've done it by insert motivation and structure, and you've got hyperfocus, and that's typical for us. I have it too, and what you've done is, and listeners, please understand that here is a man who might as well win a Nobel Prize for what he did. It's incredible. And with ADHD, once again, giving the lie that this is a deficit and that it need be a disorder. You said it was an asset that you couldn't have done it without it.
Absolutely.
You're a new hero in my eyes. You're really amazing. Just to repeat the name of the book, Chasing My Cure, A Doctor's Race to Turn Hope into Action, a memoir. Dr. David Fajgenbaum, whose name is spelled Fajgenbaum. Just a truly remarkable man. I can't thank you enough for joining us on Distraction.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the work you do to spread important information, also to inspire people like me, individuals with ADHD who, it's not easy, but if you can, put the boundaries around your ADHD, and you can use it as an asset. So thank you for all that you do.
Well, thanks a million, and good luck with the book, David, and hope to speak to you again.
I look forward to it.
Well, that's it for today's episode. My thanks to Dr. David Fajgenbaum for joining me. What an amazing story. I mean, truly, can you imagine being told that you have a disease for which there is no cure and no one's working at finding one, so you will die before any cure might be found? And instead of giving up, what does he do? He says, I'll find a treatment. I'll prolong my life. I want to get married and have a child. And he does it in between episodes, 5 episodes no less, of relapses, during any one of which he might have died. If you pitched this story to Hollywood, they would laugh you out of the room as being ridiculously incredible. And yet it's true. It's true and really inspiring. This man, I mean, my gosh, what a story. And honestly, I've never heard anything like it. I don't know if any of you have. Someone finds the treatment for the disease that is about to kill him. Does that happen every day? Does this world need news like this? Yes, it does. This is really, really breathtaking. Well, please reach out to us with your comments on this show or any show ideas, questions. We love, love, love to hear from you. Just email connect@distractionpodcast.com. That's connect@distractionpodcast.com. We truly depend on and thrive with your questions, comments, and show ideas. Distraction is created by Sounds Great Media. Our recording engineer and editor is the unbelievably brilliant Pat Keogh. And our producer is the equally brilliant Sarah Guertin.
The episode you just heard was made possible by our sponsor, Landmark College, the college for students who learn differently, offering comprehensive supports for students with ADHD and other learning differences, both on campus and online. Learn more at lcdistraction.org.